Okay, thank you. My name is Russell Berman. I'm on the faculty at Stanford, and I've been asked to introduce Peter. It's a privilege to introduce Peter Thiel. A privilege, but also a considerable challenge to introduce someone as well known as Peter, a leading entrepreneur with a high public and political profile. He's surely familiar to very many of you. PayPal, Palantir, Facebook, Founders Fund. Suffice it to say that Peter Thiel is one of the leaders of the private sector in the United States today. In another era, one might have said a captain of industry. I wish the academic world would have more dialogue with the private sector. Born in Frankfurt, Germany in 1967, he moved with his family to Ohio, then to South Africa, and then Southwest Africa, and then to California. He graduated valedictorian near here from San Mateo High School in 1985 and proceeded to Stanford, where he majored in philosophy. That was the era of the controversy over the Western culture curriculum, in response to which Peter co-founded the conservative student newspaper, the Stanford Review, which still thrives, and you heard from the current editor, Mimi St. John. Mimi St. John, I'm proud to say, an advisee of mine, I'd be remiss also in omitting another aspect of Peter's Stanford trajectory, his encounters with the late René Girard, then a member of the departments of French and Comparative Literature, and Girard's accounts of religion, competition, and scapegoating. In my sense, my point of view, a big piece of what goes on in cancel culture events has to do with that logic of scapegoating. Add to Peter's profile his attending School of Law, where he received his degree in 1992 before launching his storied career in technology, entrepreneurship, politics, and the public sphere. Let me end with a quotation that would frame Peter's work from a student. I've been fortunate to be able to teach several seminars with Peter where we've had to limit enrollment and ask for students to apply for admission. Here's what one student wrote. I can't wait for the opportunity to interact with and learn from Peter Thiel. I admire Mr. Thiel for helping found the modern financial payment system with PayPal and for supporting and inspiring hundreds of entrepreneurs through the Founders Fund and the Thiel Scholarship. As someone interested in deep tech, Palantir has always fascinated me for its use of AI techniques on massive amounts of data. I admire Mr. Thiel's integrity to stand by his ideas and believe that this course will add unparalleled breadth to my Stanford education. That's the student said, and I'm sure that Peter will not disappoint us in his comments today. Peter Thiel.
Russell, thank you so much. It's always hard to live up to such a flattering introduction. I'm going to try to cover a lot of different, somewhat disjointed ideas today, and then try to make it interactive and make it as much of a conversation as possible. But maybe a question I always like to start and frame is, what is the antonym of diversity? And the placeholder answer I would give for an antonym for diversity, the antonym of diversity is university. And we should, and in some ways what I gather we're trying to come to terms with are all these ways that the university as a place where we search for truth, where there's a certain amount of freedom, civility, a certain canon is being threatened by this sort of amorphous thing that's somehow the anti-university, that is, the postmodern multiversity that is maybe, it's somehow in some parts nihilistic, in some parts relativistic, in some parts totalitarian, and it probably would take, more time than I have to unpack all of those paradoxes. And then of course it's the problem of the university in the larger context of the questions of classical liberalism, and which seems to be failing and in trouble in a lot of different ways, and that one should also think about. I've been involved in these campus wars, culture wars debates for something like 35 years. We started the Stanford, and I'll just recount one story from 35 or so years ago. Around the time we started the Stanford Review in 1987, the live issue was the debate about Western culture, the freshman core curriculum program, and it was going to be sort of phased out. The 88-89 school year was the first year where The first of the new experimental culture, ideas and values was the first program to replace Western culture. It's framed as multicultural. And I thought we should do an expose on this sort of the first class. And it was sort of, a tendentious Marxist professor. It was not really about non-Western cultures. It was all sort of these various anti-Western writers, one sort or another. And so I went to the Stanford bookstore and just started reading through the books. And of course, I was sort of man with a hammer, tries to find a nail everywhere, and was just trying to find the most tendentious things that were, and they all were on different dimensions. But then I finally stumbled on one book that was just the perfect book that encapsulated everything that was preposterous about it. It was I, Rigoberta Menchú, and it was a set of interviews with this sort of Guatemalan peasant Indian woman who had been oppressed in every vector of oppression. It was like a perfect pastiche. It was, she was oppressed as poor, and as there was a racial war, and there was a war, and she was an orphan, and on down the line. And it was, and then you have these sort of chapters. Rigoberta renounces marriage and motherhood. Rigoberta makes plans for the May Day parade, so it has sort of a somewhat communist undercurrent. And as so many of these debates, the Western culture debate was somehow very important. It was on one level about this freshman course at one elite university, Stanford. But then in some sense it was a debate about our whole culture, and so it sort of kicked up all these bigger things. And as a sort of 20-year-old senior, I managed to convince the editors of the Wall Street Journal to reprint some of these excerpts, and did a long excerpt on this Europe and the Americas class. When Dinesh D'Souza wrote his book on illiberal education in 1991, the Stanford chapter was entitled "Travels with Rigoberta." So this was sort of got this iconic framing. And then fast forward to the fall of 1992. I'm clerking for a judge in Atlanta. I'm driving to the office in the morning, have the radio on, and it's there's a new someone's been selected for the Nobel Peace Prize. No one's ever heard of this woman. It's Rigoberta Menchú, and there's always this legal concept of the difference between proximate causation, which is like I punch you or something, versus but-for causation. I was not the proximate cause of her getting the Nobel Peace Prize, but I was a but-for cause. But for me, she would not have gotten the Nobel Peace Prize. And sort of the scales fell off my eyes at that point. I realized I was, I thought that I was, fighting in some sort of cosmic struggle in, the forces of good and evil. And actually, I was just like, what I really had been doing was I was some two-bit actor in a left-wing psychodrama where I completed her victimization. The one group she had not been victimized by were, white Republican conservatives in the United States. I completed her victimization and guaranteed her Nobel Peace Prize. There's a whole post-mortem to the story where it's apparently much of the book was too good to be true. It was sort of semi-fictionalized. There was an attempt to get the Nobel Prize rescinded, but they can never sort of revisit these things, and so it's still quite disputed. But I think so many of these debates have this kind of quality. There's a way that you can sort of, it's like shooting fish in a barrel. The arguments are super powerful on our side. It is like screaming into a hurricane. It often does not matter. We have, and there sort of is always this worry that we are somehow, those of us who are conservative, libertarian, classical liberals, are just somehow fighting the long defeat, and that's sort of the vibe of what's going on, and the challenge with classical liberalism broadly. And so I want to, rather than sort of go through a whole set of these sort of semi-pornographic stories, which I could entertain you with the whole morning long, I wanted to try a somewhat different approach. And I think it's always important not to sort of straw man our opponents, not to take the most ridiculous version of it and make fun of it. We should always try to steel man people, to try to understand the arguments as best as they are possible. I wanted to, it's a little bit complicated, but what I want to do is I want to give you the best argument against the best argument, against the best argument, against the best argument, against classical liberalism, against the classical universities. And so four steelmanned arguments. And if you counted it, there are four. So if you do, a double negative is a positive, A quadruple negative is still positive. So the four best arguments add up to a sort of argument for classical liberalism. But let me, and this is sort of the way I've come to think of, what the real nerve of so many of these debates is and how we should think about it. Let me start by framing. If you talked during the Western culture debates in the 1980s at Stanford, if you talked to the university president, Donald Kennedy, or the senior leadership at Stanford, if alumni went to complain, there were always some radical, crazy people who said crazy things, but the standard answer was something that was sort of technocratic. Shakespeare doesn't matter, the humanities aren't that important. We have the sciences, we're making enormous progress in the sciences, we're building a particle accelerator, SLAC, et cetera, et cetera. We have, you have all this sort of cutting edge scientific research, and that sort of fundamentally is what the university is about. That's what shows it's on track. That shows what it is valuable. And there is sort of some way that we have to always ask this question about, the sciences and the technologies, how they are doing. And the version of the question that I have come to ask over the last 15 years about, is the universal question is about the progress of all these things. How fast are science and technology as a whole progressing? Is the sort of propaganda, the STEM propaganda, accurate? That we have just sort of exponentiating progress, runaway progress, things are getting sort of, it's just dizzying how fast things are improving. Or is it perhaps quite the opposite? And so if one could show that the science and technology areas are actually pretty weak, that the so-called crown jewels of STEM are not actually delivering the goods, this strikes me as a decisive, crushing blow. It's like, humanities, we all know, are ridiculous. STEM, but if STEM is ridiculous, there is just nothing left at all. And this is the idea that I've explored in sort of a variety of formats over the last 15 years. There's sort of a, it's very, let me say, it is very hard to evaluate this stuff in general, because one of the other problems of the postmodern university is that it's extremely compartmentalized, it's extremely specialized, and you're supposed to only be able to comment on these things after half a lifetime of study. And so we have ever narrower sets of guardians guarding themselves, to use the sort of corrupt Platonic metaphor. So you have the string theory people telling us how wonderful string theory people are and how everybody else just has bad math genes and can't talk about it. We have the cancer researchers promising us that they will cure cancer in 5 years, which they've been doing for the last 50. We have on and on in all these sort of hyper specialized areas. And then the question is, how much progress is actually happening? The sort of indirect intuitions I have on where it seems very, very slowed are things like, if you look at things like the economy, the standards of living among younger people, the younger generation doesn't seem to be doing better than their parents. This is sort of very odd in a sort of context of massive generalized progress. There's sort of a question, how big are the breakthroughs that are really happening? There's the definition of technology. We say technology is the thing that is changing. And in, let's say, the 1960s, technology meant computers, but also rockets and supersonic aviation and the green revolution in agriculture and underwater cities and new medicines. It was like a lot of things. And when we use technology today, it just means information technology. And I think that's kind of a tell that we have a narrow cone of progress around the world of bits, computers, internet, mobile internet. It's generated some great companies, but it's not quite been enough to take our civilization to the next level. We had a tagline on my venture capital site. They promised us flying cars, and all we got was 140 characters. Not an anti-Twitter argument, not an argument against Twitter as a company. It can work as a company. It can work, 8,000 people. I think it's going to be about half after Elon's done today. But even those 4,000 people can still just go to the office and smoke pot all day and earn decent paychecks. So it works on that level. It doesn't quite work on the level of taking our civilization to the next level. I think that these things were not that obvious in the past. When I was at Stanford in '89, in retrospect, the only subject matter you were supposed to study was computer science. That's what really worked. It wasn't even an engineering field. It was sort of a, I always think whenever people say science, I'm in favor of science, but not science in quotes. And when people use science, it's a tell that something isn't a science, like political science or climate science. And computer science is sort of like that. It's for the people who are not very good at electrical engineering, and they sort of flunked out into computer science, even though that turned out to be the one thing that worked. All the engineering fields did not work. I think electrical engineering sort of worked for maybe another decade after I was class of '89. Certainly mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, like my dad did. All of these were terrible things. We lived in a world where there was nothing you could do in the world of atoms. By the '80s, it was already clear you should not go into nuclear engineering, aeroastro engineering, and we are just not allowed to do stuff in the world of atoms. It is massively slowed. And I think this is sort of one kind of a framing I would give, that we've had this incredible stagnation for the last 50 years, and then we have unbelievable amounts of propaganda that this is not true. And that I'll do one other sort of thought experiment on, why the question of technological progress, however hard it might be, can't be avoided. Because, and I'll do this one more as a thought experiment. If you want to sort of solve our macroeconomic problems in the United States, you could solve every problem in our society if you got to 4% GDP growth. You'd grow your way out of the deficits. You'd have enough growth for everybody to do better. And how do you get to 4% GDP growth? Well, you could do something like one version would be you could get rid of all the environmental rules, all the immigration rules. You could get rid of all these rules where you would never get elected. And you can probably have too much cancerous growth, but there's certain ways you could do it politically completely infeasible. And the other way, I'll sort of do this as a thought experiment, would be you appoint a commission on accelerating technological change. And it would try to measure how fast the technological change has been happening. You'd have some crazy techno-utopian person, probably from Silicon Valley. You put them on the commission, and they would come back with the result that, it looked like we had 2% growth and 2% inflation, but really we have 4% growth and 0% inflation because the qualitative technological improvements are greater than they look. And if you could just lie about technological progress, you could save trillions and trillions of dollars. I don't go into all the details. This is basically what happened under the Clinton administration in the 1990s with the Bostrom Commission. They sort of lied about all these hedonic adjustments, and that was a key thing to balancing the budget. As a libertarian, I'm actually quite sympathetic to this because I want the welfare state to be dialed back. And so if you exaggerate technological progress, this is the way to do it. As an intellectual, I don't like lying, and I think we should try to figure out the truth of these things. And probably, if we say that, the flatness of the new iPhone is such a large hedonic adjustment that grandma should be happy to eat cat food, there's probably something about that that's wrong. And these sorts of questions cannot be avoided. So the question of generalized technological progress cannot be avoided. Go into a lot more detail, but it has, for a whole set of reasons, slowed down. So that's sort of the basic counter argument is, don't look at the humanities, look at the sciences, they're great. The counter argument, they're maybe as defective or more so than the humanities. Humanities we can sort of evaluate. You can evaluate Rigoberta Menchú, you can't evaluate string theory. And so it's sort of, I don't know, government analogies, it's like, do you think the DMV or the CIA are better run? And it's obviously the DMV is better run since people can see what they're doing. And that's probably the political intuition we should have about the sciences versus the humanities. The polemical version of it that I had once was that I think that it's better for undergraduates to major in the humanities rather than the sciences. Let's set computer science aside as the one thing that sort of works, but everything else, because in the humanities you at least know you're not going to get a job, you'll be unemployable. Whereas in the sciences, you have people who are so deluded as to believe they'll be taken care of by the natural goodness of the universe, and it's just it is just Malthusian competition. Nature bared red in tooth and claw. It's, 10 grad students in the chemistry lab fighting each other for Bunsen burners and beakers. And, one person says one wrong word, they get thrown off the overcrowded bus, and it's a relief. And it's sort of cycle and repeat. Now, the question people always ask me is why? Why did this stagnation? Why did this shift happen in the 70s? And I normally try to just avoid the question, say I don't like answering why questions. They're overdetermined, and there's sort of a lot of different kinds of things one can point to. Everything from extra government regulation to some of the low-hanging fruit was picked. It's gotten harder to find new things. That's sort of the Tyler Cowen argument. Sort of strange ways the culture's changed. The younger people have anxiety attacks and don't want to do anything anymore, and are sort of hiding in their basements, which is probably maybe not not that compatible with rapid technological progress. But if I had to sort of give a single, again, steel-manned idea, the best argument for why this has been so slowed for the last 50 years, and that I think we have to somehow engage with and take more seriously, is that there is something about science and technology that has taken a very dystopian, very destructive turn in the 20th century. And there are, it is not, we're not in the 18th century, 19th century, rationalist Enlightenment age where it seems to be simply making everything better in every way all the time. Already the two world wars, certainly the nuclear weapons, on some level suggested that the sort of, the sort of rhetoric of Rousseau or Voltaire about the natural goodness of man was starting to run, a little bit thin by the 50s and 60s, and the kind of history I would tell, it's not perfect, but of the last 70, 75 years, is this gradually seeped into society. It sort of manifested in different ways. You have a crazy person like Charles Manson. What did he see when he was overdosing, on LSD? He saw that there was going to be a thermonuclear war, and then he decided to become some sort of, anti-hero from Dostoevsky and start killing people because everything was permitted in this world that was headed towards the apocalypse. And there was something like this that seeped in. This was what gave the environmental movement so much force in the 70s. It's like, we have to just slow this down. We have to put some brakes on. And it is just the way in which so many of these technologies have this dual use component. I always like to argue rhetorically in favor of more nuclear power plants. I feel it's like arguing for the gold standard. It's so far outside the Overton window. And I think the history is that it's hard to avoid the dual use nature of these technologies. And the turning point with nuclear power was not Chernobyl or 3 Mile Island. It was 1975 when India got the bomb. We had transferred the nuclear technology to India. We believed that it was not dual usable. There was a certain way it could be used for only peaceful nuclear power. It easily got weaponized. They got a nuclear bomb. We can't give nuclear power plants to everybody in the world because everybody will have nuclear bombs, and that's sort of profoundly unstable and will blow up the world. And something like this dual nature of technology runs through so much of this stuff. There's obviously an environmental version on the left that I would say is, on some level more powerful than people on the right often like to admit. There is even the kinds of breakthroughs that we had in recent years, the mRNA vaccines. And again, the sort of the polemical version I have is, why can't we have a ticker tape parade for the scientists who invented the mRNA vaccine? And well, else we don't celebrate individuals. That's too dangerous in the 21st century. So no longer have ticker tape parades for individuals. But I think the deeper reason is people are really uncomfortable with the mRNA vaccine because it is, it's very adjacent. It's one toggle switch away from this thing that was going on at the Wuhan lab called gain of function research, which we suspect is sort of an Orwellian word for a bioweapons program. And then this is, and so it's again, there are these things that could potentially be big breakthroughs. So many of them are adjacent to something that is quite dystopian. I used to love science fiction. it is, and I think it would be sort of an interesting survey course that one could do on trying to understand why it is all so drably dystopian at this point. I mean, there's still, maybe you can do the retro Star Trek stuff from the 60s, but anything that's been published in the last 40 years, it just sort of shows this futuristic world where nothing works. And the question you have to ask is this a deep law of nature? Is this a deep truth that if there is more progress, things will just break down? Or is it somehow a reflection of this very dystopian culture we're in, where we just can't imagine anything getting better? Now, I think that this sort of dystopian limit of science and technology, where it's lost energy because you're just sort of building the machines that will destroy the world, has even at this point seeped into the computer world, where the futuristic technology on the computer side is AI, AGI, artificial general intelligence. I always hate the word because it's sort of this catch-all word that can mean everything and therefore nothing. But I was involved peripherally with some of these sort of East Bay rationalist, futuristic groups. There was one called the Singularity Institute in the 2000s, and the sort of the self-understanding was, building an AGI, it's going to be this most important technology in the history of the world. We better make sure it's friendly to human beings, and we're going to work on making sure that it's friendly. And the vibe sort of got a little bit stranger, and I think it was around 2015 that I sort of realized that they weren't really. They didn't seem to be working that hard on the AGI anymore, and they seemed to be more pessimistic at where it was going to go. And it was kind of it sort of devolved into sort of a Burning Man camp. It was sort of had gone from sort of transhumanist to Luddite in 15 years, and something had sort of gone wrong. And it was finally confirmed to me by a post from MIRI, Machine Intelligence Research Institute, the successor organization, in April of this year. And this, again, these are the people who are, and this is sort of the cutting edge thought leaders of the people who are pushing AGI for the last 20 years. And it was fairly important in the whole Silicon Valley ecosystem. Title: MIRI announces new death with dignity strategy. And then the summary: it's obvious at this point that humanity isn't going to solve the alignment problem, i.e., how is AI aligned with humans, or even try very hard, or even go out with much of a fight. Since survival is unattainable, we should shift the focus of our efforts to helping humanity die with slightly more dignity. And then anyway, it goes on to talk about why it's only slightly more dignity, because people are so pathetic and they've been so lame at dealing with this. And of course, you can, there's probably a lot you can say that, this was somehow deeply in the logic of the whole AI program for decades, that it was potentially going to be very dangerous. If you believe in Darwinism or Machiavellianism, there are no purely self-interested actors. And then, if you get a superhuman AGI, you will never know that it's aligned. So there was something, there was a very deep problem. People had avoided it for 20 years or so. At some point, one day they wake up, and the best thing we can do is just hand out some Kool-Aid a la People's Temple to everybody, or something like this. And if we, and then I think, lest we just dismiss this sort of thing as just the kind of thing that happens in a post-COVID mental breakdown world. I found another article from Nick Bostrom, who's sort of an Oxford academic, and most of these people are sort of, they're interesting because they have nothing to say. They're interesting because they're just mouthpieces. It's like the mouth of Sauron. It's just sort of complete sort of cogs in the machine, but they're useful because they tell us exactly where the zeitgeist is in some ways. And this was from 2019, pre-COVID, the vulnerable world hypothesis, and it goes through a whole litany of these different ways where science and technology are creating all these dangers for the world, and what do we do about them? And it's the precautionary principle, whatever that means. But then, he has a 4-part program for achieving stabilization, and I will just read off the 4 things you need to do to make our world less vulnerable and achieve stabilization in the sort of, we have this exponentiating technology where maybe it's not progressing that quickly, but still progressing quickly enough. There are a lot of dangerous corner cases. You only need to do these four things to stabilize the world. Number one, restrict technological development. Number two, ensure that there does not exist a large population of actors representing a wide and recognizably human distribution of motives. So that sounds like somewhat incompatible with the DEI, at least in the ideas form of diversity. Number three, establish extremely effective preventive policing. And number four, establish effective global governance, since you can't let, even if there's like one little island somewhere where this doesn't apply, it's no good. And so it is basic, and this is the zeitgeist on the other side. It is the precautionary principle. It is, we're not going to make it for another century on this planet, and therefore, we need to embrace a one world totalitarian state right now. So third and fourth counter arguments. The third, just to repeat, the first counter argument is science is great. It's solving, we don't even pay attention to the humanities. Counter argument, no, it's not. Third main counter argument, well, science is too dangerous. We have to slow it down. So it's good that it's not so great. We're slowing it down. We need to slow it down even more. And then the counter argument, and this is where I would return to classical liberalism, is that however dangerous science and technology are, it seems to me that totalitarianism is far more dangerous, and that whatever the dangers are in the future, we need to never underestimate the danger of one world totalitarian state. Once you get that, hard to see what it ends. There's always there's always sort of the frame where I think it's in 1 Thessalonians 5, chapter 3. The political slogan of the Antichrist is peace and safety, and I think what I want to suggest is that, and you get it when you have sort of a homogenized one world totalitarian state. And what I want to suggest in closing is perhaps we would do well to be a little bit more scared of the Antichrist and a little bit less scared of Armageddon. Thank you very much.